When we were thinking about who we would get to keynote this, it was real clear and obvious that it would be Asha Curran. And the reason for that is, who do you know that in the last 10 years has created a global movement that unleashes the power of human generosity? Who do you know that sat down at a table with a handful of people and said, you know what, I have an idea. What if we thought about creating this way to connect people around the globe and get them to think and celebrate generosity one day out of the year? Who do you know would do that? First of all, who do you know would even be bold enough to think of doing something like that? To think that you could actually rally the forces of foundations and individuals around the globe to actually do something like that. Well, that's this woman that we're going to bring up here. And as we think about the international nature of generosity, and as we think about the challenges that we're facing in our organizations to raise more money, to get people to think differently about giving, here is an example of someone and her organization now that has grown far beyond simply Giving Tuesday. Giving Tuesday is just a day they celebrate giving. But they're doing work all throughout the year now to help empower individuals and institutions to give more. But who do you know who would have done that? It's Asha. Now you can look at her bio. She's connected to all of these amazing institutions, Stanford, Harvard, and also the Oxford University. But what I know of this woman is her tenacity, of her desire to see change, of her belief in social movements, and of her commitment to see that we get to a place in this society where all people believe that they have agency to make change. And that is why I'm so happy that Asha is with us. And if you want to know more about her, you're going to find out a lot about her when she comes up to give her speech. But I have a podcast, some of you might have heard of it. If you haven't, you should listen to it. It's called the Heart of Giving Podcast. We have Giving Tuesday Day with Asha. Every Giving Tuesday, Asha comes on. She talks about where we are at Giving Tuesday. I encourage you to listen to that. But Asha is a hero, a real hero, a heroine. She doesn't like me saying this, but no one has been able to do what she's done. She's a unicorn, really. Come on up here, Asha, now that I've embarrassed you.
Thank you. That was by far the most incredible introduction I have ever or will ever receive. Thank you, Art. I have learned so much from you and from you, Jane, since I was the new girl in the room 12 years ago with absolutely no idea what I was doing. And that was a great story about me sitting around a table and saying, let's create this global movement. It didn't quite happen like that because it really started out being a fun idea for a hashtag. And this was back in 2012 when I was working at the 92nd Street Y, and my job was to think about what community means in the 21st century and about how to use this nascent, burgeoning force multiplication zeitgeist of social media, right? And so Giving Tuesday was one of the things that we decided to try. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the background, a little context about Giving Tuesday and where we are now. But I'm not actually talking about Giving Tuesday. What I want to talk about really is the things that were some of the foundational principles that we used, some of the rules that we broke, and so many of the lessons that we learned from Giving Tuesday's growth, because they are so broadly applicable. They can be drawn out and applied in a million different creative ways across the social sector. So the basic idea, I feel kind of sheepish about this now, but in the very first year, very US focused, very focused on giving to nonprofits. But the idea was that anybody can give, that everyone has something to give, that everyone has something that they need. And we made a couple of early decisions that ended up being far more important than we might have thought at the time. The first thing we did was to decide not to brand it. And as you can imagine, that was quite a controversial decision internally, right? Because we are raised in the nonprofit world, and in all sectors, I believe, right, to think that brand is paramount. If this hashtag was successful, why in the world wouldn't we want it connected to the name of our institution? But at that point in time, there was just the beginning of this tidal wave of change in the way that people connected and consumed and communicated. And the instinct, because that's really all it was then, was to say, if this is branded, it's not going to go viral, right? It's not going to be something that people feel that they can take, that they can make their own. And that was the right call. The other thing we did was to get it out into the world 60 days after thinking about it in the first place. Now, anybody who works for any nonprofit, really, but especially a big institution, which the 92nd Street Y is, knows that that's not a typical a typical trajectory, right? We could have thought of this idea and then run it through committee meetings for a year before it saw the light of day, and it would have ended up being a mishmash of the clarity of its original idea. So we got it out into the world, and what we did was to aim to have 100 nonprofits sign on and say they would do something for Giving Tuesday. That could literally mean send a tweet, and we would put their logo on our pro bono, terrible website that we hastily set up. Well, we ended up with 2,500 nonprofits signing up in those 60 days. And back then, wow, that seemed like an enormous number. And when the thing itself happened, there was a process, those 60 days. It was a crazy, crazy 60 days of us traversing the country, having meetups with anybody who would host us, telling people about the idea, and then making them our ambassadors, having them spread the word, academics, tech people, people from all sectors, media. And so after the first Giving Tuesday, we did surveys, et cetera, and found that a huge majority of organizations were using the day to try something new. And we thought that was really wonderful. They were really creative. And the way that that looked was that they took our idea and they changed it. So the very first organization to do that was this one, Dress for Success, which created Giving Shoes Day. Part of the reason for Giving Tuesday's success is that so many things rhyme with Tuesday. So Giving Shoes Day was one of the first, and there was an actual conversation about whether we should send them a cease and desist letter, right? And that would have been a pretty typical thing to do. Now, it happens to be one of my pet peeves that big nonprofits deploy resources toward sending their lawyers out to make sure other people don't use the shade of color of their logo. Like, let's remember our missions here. But instead, we said, this is awesome. This is really cool. Let people take it. Let people own it. Let people change it. So we celebrated that, and that was what happened from an organizational perspective. What was really magical, too, was what happened from an individual perspective. Entire communities came together. People found a joy in talking about generosity in the public square in a way that just hadn't happened before. Back in these days, social media was kind of not the threat to democracy it is now, and the sort of divisive force that it is now. It was really just kind of trite, right? People were just kind of trying out new things, trying out memes, trying out sharing what they had for lunch. So here, this is a Toronto suburb. This is the first year of Giving Tuesday. A young woman, super junior, a couple years out of college, decides to rally her whole small town around this idea, gets the name Giving Tuesday put on the local buses, right? Creates a spike in giving to all of their local nonprofits. And this woman, right, who I will never meet but talk about constantly, because when I saw this post, it was like a lightning bolt moment, right? I'm not famous, I don't have $1 million, but I can help change lives on Giving Tuesday. That one post speaks to everything Jane just talked about why giving is such an incredibly important part of civic participation. So what does it look like over the years? It looks like children coming together to do volunteer projects. It looks like people creating little free pantries and little free libraries in their communities. It looks like people painting love letters on the sidewalks of their communities. It looks like people leaving coins in a public washing machine for the next person who's going to use the machine. It looks like two roommates in New York City who were so excited by the idea that they decided to take the day off work and create tons of spaghetti and lasagnas for a local home for the elderly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one thing I get asked all the time is, these are great, super, really nice, right? Now, I happen to think it's more than just nice. I think that a tidal wave of micro-generosity actions is absolutely world-changing. But I do get asked, but the focus on this nice stuff, right? The focus on this stuff that is not about civil society directly, doesn't that detract from the importance of monetary giving to nonprofits? And the answer is absolutely not, because this is what happened with the money. So the very first year of Giving Tuesday, we were able to record, via data from the few of the platforms we were connected to, an increase of $15 million in giving over the same day the previous year. And we thought that was so amazing. And it grew every single year. And now, the last Giving Tuesday on 2023, $3.1 billion was donated. Average gift size, $100. These are not billionaires, these are not millionaires, these are everyday people like you and me, these are everyday citizens. Now, to put this number in context, $3 billion is more than any major US foundation, with the one exception of the Gates Foundation, disperses in an entire calendar year. This is a massive infusion of general operating support into the nonprofit sector, and all those acts of kindness fuel this giving. They don't take away from it, because people don't give money with one side of their head and give kindness with another side. It all comes from the same place, right? It all comes from the same value, this universal and deeply held value of generosity. Next thing that happened, and my favorite things about Giving Tuesday are all things that I didn't expect, right? And I see my job as being to see what rises organically out of this incredible community and then decide where we can place our admittedly limited resources to support and uplift that work. So we began to see activity happening around the world in the years following that first year, even in the months following that first year. And we started to get calls. First, it was from UK and Canada, which was really cool, but not super surprising. But then it was from Russia and Tanzania and Brazil. And there were people saying, we really like this idea. Do you mind if we run it in this country? And it was just like Giving Shoes Day, right? At a much, much larger scale. And so we said, yeah, that's amazing that you want to do that. And of course, a generosity movement should always be led by people who know what generosity looks like in their own communities. Now, in the global development world and the philanthropy world now, localization and proximate leadership are often used buzzwords, but they weren't then, right? And the decision to hand away so much agency was questioned by a lot of people. But we forged ahead, and we did it, and now Giving Tuesday is in 101 countries. And it looks different in every country because every single leader has all the agency and all the power to manifest the movement in whatever way they see fit for their community. This is in Liberia, one of our longest-running movements, where our leader, who's right front and center there, Jala, his goal is to flip the script on traditional narratives about who needs and who gives. And in this particular picture, he did a volunteer activation where he gathered a community of people who were either homeless or in rehabs, and they became the givers for Giving Tuesday. They volunteered to roam around the community, handing out food, planting gardens, right? They said they had never thought of themselves as givers before. They had never known they had that kind of power before. On the most recent Giving Tuesday, Jala had fundraised to buy a bus, and he painted the Radical Generosity bus on the side of that bus, and now it drives kindergartners from dangerous areas to school every single day and drives them home. And while they're on the bus, they get parent and teacher volunteers who give them conversations and lessons about the importance of generosity and giving. The creativity is really astounding. They're also allowed to change the name to whatever seems most relevant. This is our movement in Brazil, which is called Dia de Doar. But our movement in Portugal is called Giving Tuesday Portugal. It's always their choice. But miraculously, every single country, even though they take our logo and they change it, and back in the day when we were still at the Y, the designer there who had designed the original Giving Tuesday heart was very taken aback by this. He was like, didn't suggest a cease and desist letter. But he did say, are we really letting people just change to their own flag colors, to their own national landmarks? And we said, this is the greatest thing ever. Yes, we are letting them do that. And now, even though I haven't worked at the Y in 6 years, I send him every new logo that gets created, and he is so proud. But what I love about the logo story is that every single one of these 101 leaders have decided on their own to keep the Giving Tuesday heart. The heart is always the central part of their logo, and then it is adapted and contextualized. And this is how the global growth has spread. Now, I think this is so beautiful because it speaks to how universal this value is, right? Every person on earth has a fundamental need to give, just like every person on earth has a fundamental need to love and be loved. They are flip sides of the same coin, and so every community that celebrates Giving Tuesday is driven by the same sense of purpose and need for connection. So why? How did that happen, right? What are some of the things that we did or decided or allowed that can be responsible for that kind of scale? The most important one, because our time is limited, I could go on and on forever, but the most important one is the value of co-ownership. Now, we talk about co-creation a lot in the sector, right? And actually, I have to say that I've seen a real shift toward more co-creation in the sector in the past several years, and that really makes me happy. I think that's a really good thing because I think the competitive mindset that too often pervades our work holds us back from a lot of success and a lot of potential amazing collaborations. So the next step from co-creation, and co-creation's been around for a long time. The corporate sector actually does co-creation really well, right? In a corporate context, that might mean designing a product and opening up the design of that product to more stakeholders than would be normal, right? Maybe to the people who might eventually use it, maybe to the people who might eventually sell it. But the ownership of that product, the profit from it, still rests with that corporation. So co-creation is a wonderful first step. Co-ownership is the next one. And co-ownership it works, and it's difficult. It's difficult to do because it requires us unlearning a whole lot of the things that we thought were set in stone, right? It's all about growing our own brand. It's about keeping other people from taking our work or taking credit for our work. With co-ownership, you're giving an idea away. You're sharing a mission, and you're saying, here, have this platform, and do with it what you will. And I get asked all the time, what would happen if somebody did that and they were a bad actor? And in 12 years, that has not happened. People who are good actors are drawn to being leaders of this movement. And this is why I say Giving Tuesday for me is like a prism through which we can see what's possible for us to do. And it's a platform and a shared space to make those possibilities realities. These are our global leaders. This happened in May. We were at 90 countries then. This was the most incredible room I've ever been in. By far the most pluralistic, by far the most diverse by every possible metric. Some of these people are highly resourced leaders of major fundraising associations. Some of them are completely grassroots community organizers or just citizens who want to do the work. And each of them is leading an entire country movement. Now, they have all the agency in the world, but the second secret of co-ownership and of Giving Tuesday's success is they're not doing it alone. Agency doesn't have to mean silo, right? They are deeply interconnected because the worst waste of all of this would be if we didn't utilize such an incredible ecosystem as a peer learning exercise. So they are constantly learning from each other. They are always supporting each other. And our ethos is, if something works, I'll be so happy if you replicate it, and I'll be even happier if you do it even better than I did it. That's a mindset, right? That's a mindset shift, and it's more than just shifting tactics or strategies, right? Everything changes when you approach work with that mindset. Now we have a network of youth leaders as well. which was started by this young lady who was a girl when she DM'd us on Instagram and asked us if she could start Giving Tuesday Kids. And of course we said yes, so she now owns Giving Tuesday Kids, and we have a network of tens of thousands of young people around the globe, also deeply interconnected, also working together, and they are leaders. They're not looking to us to see what they can do philanthropically. They're not looking to their parents to see what they should be doing. They know what they care about, right? They are 12 years old, 14 years old, and they have passions. They have 501c3s in some cases. They could come here and give us a master class in fundraising because they are so incredibly good at engagement. But it's not only young people who engage differently now, it's all of us. Right? I'm a middle-aged lady, and I engage totally differently with things than I did 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. Right? So it requires a lot of rethinking. This is also an important one and also a really hard one, right? Mission over brand. This has been so important to the core of Giving Tuesday from the very beginning. It is the reason we took our brand off of the words itself. It is why Giving Tuesday has grown to be its own brand, right? Because it is a brand that can be so broadly co-owned. Mission over brand means exactly what it says. You put your logo, even your organization's name, less important than what you're trying to achieve. Now, if I'm trying to achieve something, and I really have my eye laser focused on my mission, the first thing I'm gonna do is to reach out to others who are mission aligned, right? And I'm gonna say, let's work together. And so this is, again, this was an organic thing that happened that we sort of were seeing more and more and more of and decided this is really important. And these are coalition campaigns. So there are dozens and dozens and dozens, and the very first one, I believe, was Giving Zoo Day. Now, Giving Zoo Day was started by a tiny little zoo in Florida, which said, you know, instead of being in competition with all these other zoos for fundraising, why don't we tell a larger story? We'll create this campaign. Anybody who wants to join can. Any zoo from across the country can join. And we'll tell a story about why zoos are important to our wildlife conservation and our children and so forth. And they all raised more money. And none of their brands were front and center in the campaign. So now we have these campaigns that happen around cause, culture, identity, or place. The community-based ones are incredibly important because they provoke a huge surge of support for local nonprofits, right, local nonprofits who are not accessing big philanthropy dollars, and they bring people together, right? They build community and they make people happy. Now, I really look at these campaigns and I hope that they are the future of the sector, right? That eventually what we see is all coalition work. And the organizations' names, they're there, they're findable, right? We want to give them money where we can, et cetera, but they're not front and center because people don't engage with that anymore, right? This is not our parents' generation where you bought the same shampoo for an entire lifetime. You bought the same model of car for an entire lifetime. That doesn't happen now with brands, and it doesn't happen with causes either. It's about who can create the moment of inspiration that sparks behavior. Anything that does that is going to get the support, is going to get the resource. And if that's GoFundMe, it's GoFundMe. And if it's a civil society organization, then it is. And if it's a mutual aid, then it is. But provoking or inspiring generosity is going to have benefits across the spectrum because people who give in more than one way. On Giving Tuesday, what we know from our data is giving money is the most common way that people engage, but only giving money is the least common way that they engage. They give money, they advocate, they brag about their giving, they share it with their networks, right? They get out on the street and do something, they do acts of kindness. So this is the way all of our different networks work together. It's a terrible graphic, right? And I don't like it, but it's so difficult to represent visually how our ecosystem works, how deeply interconnected all of these different nodes are. So let's bring it back to the moment that we're in, that we've been talking about today, which is this decline in donor participation, which we are all really concerned about. And one thing that we can say definitively is that it's not because there's a lack of generosity. That's just a fact. Generosity is strong. It is a need, right? It's not people doing other people a favor, right? It feeds them as well as the recipient. So if we start from that premise, and we have a lot of data from our data commons, which is surveys and research projects and analysis of years of transactional giving from multiple platforms and multiple payment processors, et cetera. And our goal with the data commons is to understand the full generosity landscape. What inspires generosity of all kinds, right? And where can we learn from it, and where can we replicate it to inspire even more? So this is the basic premise that people give, right? This amount of people worldwide gave in some way. But we also know that participation in monetary giving to nonprofits is declining. And dollars are actually plateauing, where for a long time they were rising. Now, some make the argument that, if we're talking about $10 billion being given by 15 different couples or 40 million people, who cares? It's the same $10 billion, right? It's all going to civil society. But no, it makes a huge difference, right? For all the reasons Jane outlined. Because it is so, so important for ordinary citizens to participate in the generosity economy. So the red line is the most recent year, and that is not looking great. But there's even more good news, which is that we can reverse this trend, right? We can, but it will take a sector-wide mindset shift. Right? We need to be willing to break the old rules. We need to be willing to unlearn the things we think we know. Sometimes expertise can be the most dangerous thing. If we are so sure that what we know is the right way to do things, it's so hard to say, well, why take a risk on something new? Right? I learned these best practices years and years and years ago. So we know that over the course of the year, we released a report yesterday. It's really interesting. Some of the top line findings are, we still know, backed up every single time we study it, that people are giving in many forms, that they're giving despite political affiliation. So what we found is that people's political worldview is one thing, but their view on generosity is almost all the same. How important it is, how important the work of nonprofits is, how important it is as a value to express on a personal level. The most staggering stat from the report we released yesterday, I couldn't believe this, was that the group of people who said that they had not been solicited at all in the previous 6 months, 70% of them said that the work of nonprofits is important and giving is important, right? So, so many people are simply not being reached. So many people are simply not being asked. Now, I blame the myth of donor fatigue partly for this, right? People might be sick of hearing from a particular organization that hasn't gotten its message down, right? But they are not sick of being asked to give. So just the basic act, right, of reaching out to people and engaging them in your mission is something that is like an easy, low-hanging fruit first step. A couple other things I would say to keep in mind, can't repeat it enough times, generosity is abundant. Collective giving is the future of giving. It just is. We see this in Giving Tuesday, because when we ask people what inspired them to do something on Giving Tuesday, they list a lot of different reasons, but the basic one is, I wanted to feel like I was part of something bigger than myself. We all want to feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves, and collective giving gives us that. We see this in the rise of giving circles. We see it in the collective response to bad things happening in the world. So paying more attention to those moments where we can rally people to be together, to be giving together. It doesn't matter if their gift is $1 million or $5, right? But if they feel a sense of connection to other people, they will be more engaged and they will be stickier. They want to come back for that feeling. So what are we providing to them? What are we providing them as a reward for becoming part of our world, for becoming part of our mission? And coined by one of Giving Tuesday's original architects, Aaron Sharinian, from donor to owner. Right, so thought experiment. What would happen if none of us in this room could use the word donor for a year? What words might we come up with instead? Champion, leader, ambassador. Those words are all better than donor, right? Which literally speaks to the ability of someone to give money or items. That's all it speaks to. People want to be spoken to as their whole selves. Right? So changing our message to think about people as owners of our mission is a radical change. And basically, in summation, it's all about people and it's all about relationships. So it was mentioned earlier, I think by Jane, this shift from transactional giving to relational, or transactional fundraising to relational fundraising. That's a journey that we are on, and we need to work really, really hard to all get there. The sense of joy and celebration that people show when they are on that journey, these are 3 of our country leaders. On paper, they have very little in common, right? But they have this in common, this dream of a more generous world, and it bonds them in such an incredible way. And it also makes them feel less lonely. They are doing good work, but they often feel so isolated. We're all doing good work too, and we often feel isolated. How can we draw lessons from them so that we're linking arms with each other, utilizing each other as we try to do this transformative work? So more than all of these charts and graphs and et cetera, and animations, this is really how I think about it, right? These systems in nature work brilliantly, but they're not about the importance of each component part. They're about the importance of the whole, and they actually mystify scientists and academics as to how exactly they work. Well, they work because not because of each individual ant or each individual bee or whatever have you, each individual starling. They work because of the relationship between each part. They work because they are doing it all in murmuration together. And we can be inspired by that. And if we are inspired enough, and if we work together, like these bees and these ants, right, we will inspire all the people to join us and support us. Thank you. Thank you.